All right, good morning. Thanks for coming. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm a professor of history at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. I did my PhD in 2016 at the University of Alabama. And I'm really lucky to be here to talk to you about Alabama barbecue. It's really popular right now. Barbecue has its own TV shows right on the Travel Channel and the Food Network and Netflix and all these really exciting places. I think it appeals to us these days because we're in a world of fast food and convenient food, and barbecue is still something that forces us to slow down a little bit in our hectic lives and actually smell some real smoke, right? See a real fire for once. In a way, I think then its appeal is that it seems to be stuck in time, right? A remnant of the past, piece of nostalgia maybe for us. But barbecue has always been changing, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. In a way, barbecue reflects the times in which it's in, and it has a really long history in this country and in this state in particular. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about kind of each step in barbecue's evolution in the country and in Alabama in particular. I'm going to slow down though here in this second section and really flesh out the story for you because it's my favorite story from the book. So in 2013 I got started doing this project because the state Department of Tourism wanted to do a Year of Alabama barbecue campaign. Actually stopped at the Welcome Center and still saw that poster right across the state line. To do a Year of Alabama barbecue campaign though, they had to know what that actually meant. What is Alabama barbecue? Where did it come from? What's the story behind it? How do you define it? And that's why they hired me. Okay, they got together with this group called the Southern Foodways Alliance out of the University of Mississippi. They co-sponsored a grant, and that grant went to a UA professor and I. So in 2013, I started studying Alabama barbecue. Actually met the woman who would be my wife that same year. And her family for 4 years called me Dr. Barbecue. Before they knew that they'd eventually have to learn my real name, that is. But yeah, in 2017 then, I kept going and turned it into my first book, which you can see over there. So yeah, I'm going to tell a little story from each of these sections, share some of my favorite parts, but we're really going to dig into the second part because Alabama has one unique story. It was the source of an anti-barbecue campaign. Barbecue as we know it today could not exist without a historical process called the Columbian Exchange. Okay, so this refers to the meeting of people, plants, animals, and even diseases that had been for a long time separated across the continents. All right, so it's in the meeting of Native Americans, African people, and Europeans that make possible the barbecue that we see on our plates and that we know today. Yeah, they each provide something to the recipe. Native Americans provided the technique. When Europeans showed up in the Americas, the Caribbean, North America, Central America, they observed Native Americans cooking low and slow. For the English in particular, this was a little bit different. They tended to roast and broil things at higher heats. So this low and slow method over a wooden framework pictured here really stood out to them. In fact, the term barbecue comes from the Taino, which is an indigenous people of like Cuba and Puerto Rico. The Taino people referred to this wooden framework as a barbacoa, made out of green, bendable wood, so it doesn't catch fire so easily, raised well above the fire itself. For Native Americans, especially these Native Americans, this is a method that makes sense for them. It's something that you can leave all day while you perform the other work of subsistence. You can mend tools, you can go hunting, you can go fishing, you can fix the nets, you can repair the house. Meanwhile, right, the meat smokes slowly and carefully over a long period of time. It also makes sense for them because they, at least not at that time, they did not have domesticated livestock. Native Americans did not have pigs, they did not have cows. Those things did not exist in North America. And so they have game, right? Wild game that they're hunting. And right, if there's any hunters in here, probably know that gamey meat is tougher meat, right? Stronger ligaments, more cartilage, leaner, not as much fat on it. And so this low and slow method, right, helps break down those cartilages and tendons and stuff. So it's something that made sense to them in their time and place, in their lifestyles. Europeans have their own contributions to the barbecue that we know today. They provide the meats that we tend to eat, right? Beef, right, for brisket, pork for ribs and pork shoulders, chickens, but even things like goats and lambs. They also tend to provide a lot of the recipes for desserts that we typically associate with a barbecue in this state and around the country. Right, they had custard-based desserts, so something like banana pudding or a lemon meringue pie. Pies in general were very popular among the English. The English also provide the basis for some of our sauces that still exist today. They had a preference for vinegar, and so the vinegar-based sauces of places like North Carolina owe their heritage to predominantly English settlement. But there's other Europeans who have made contributions too. The Germans and the French have brought with them a preference for pork shoulders and for mustard, and that predominates a place like South Carolina, the mustard-based sauce, that gold sauce that you see. And South Carolina, true enough, had a large settlement of German and French people many hundreds of years ago. And finally, out of all these groups, Africans coming as enslaved laborers likely did most of the work. And so that means that they have the final say over the taste profile when it's done, how it looks, and what at the end of the day it really tastes like. They're also responsible for contributing many of the spice profiles used in the dry rubs today. All right, so without these three groups meeting and mixing in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, barbecue, at least the type that we see on our plate, could not exist. So I think the story, actually, of Alabama barbecue starts in Virginia. So we're going to take a brief stop in Virginia, but then we're going to come to Alabama and stay there for the rest of the talk. So in Virginia, in colonial Virginia, pigs took off, okay? The English brought these pigs with them. Pigs produce flesh at a more efficient rate than cows do. So for every pound they eat, they grow more than a pound fed to a cow, for instance. So they're very efficient. They eat anything. They're omnivores. They literally will eat the trash. So you can literally turn trash into food by feeding it to a pig. They can defend themselves. which for the English colonists in early Virginia and early North Carolina was a big plus, because they could just let them roam in the woods. They grow tusks and they can fight things off. Cows can't do that. They take care of themselves. They feed themselves, right? Rummaging for fungi, for insects, for nuts, vegetation, and other things. So for people on the edge of an empire, right, in what at the time was a backwater outpost, the pig just made a lot of sense for their lifestyle. They could do the work of building new homes and building new farms, and then eventually raising cash crops, first tobacco, and then things like rice and cotton down the road. Meanwhile, right, their food is literally taking care of itself. And then they could go into the woods, hunt down their pigs, and slaughter them once a year. Even in early Virginia, barbecue played a huge role in colonial politics. Virginia had its own colonial legislature, and even in the early days, it was a ritual that on election day, the wealthiest people of the town or the county would provide a barbecue for the people. They would usually not attend. It was not considered respectable to lower yourself and appear to be campaigning for office. You're supposed to look like you didn't want it. But then on election day, there'd be a smoked pig and a keg of whiskey show up on the town square, and there'd be someone there saying something like, oh, just a gift from Mr. Washington. It was part of the ritual that, the wealthiest people, like Washington and Jefferson and so on, they were supposed to show their generosity to the people, because that's what, at the time, good gentlemen did. And then in return, the people would show what we call deference or respect, and put those people into office, and then basically leave them alone, at least until the next election cycle, when it was time to get another pork sandwich and a glass of whiskey. So this is how politics worked at the time. It was very hierarchical, but there were sets of mutual obligations, right? The rich and wealthy pursuing power owe generosity and hospitality. They expect then loyalty and obedience in return. Yeah?
Are there any phrases we use today in politics that root back to the pork and whiskey, or the...
There are, ideas, though. And I'm setting this up because this is all going to change. And it changes, in part, in Alabama, the way that politicians and the people relate to one another. I think Alabama's the origin, the story I'm about to tell you next, is the origin of our way of thinking about politics. Every 4 years, people always ask, which candidate would you rather have a beer with? Okay, that type of politics is just around the corner. All right, so I start the story in Virginia because Virginians make up a lot of the settlers of what becomes Alabama. So toward the end of the 1700s, places like Virginia, North Carolina, they are overcropped. They've been growing tobacco there for 150-ish years, and the land just can't take it anymore. Meanwhile, the United States government is accessing the land in the Deep South, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, mostly right through Indian removal, clearing the way for then these white settlers to take their place. And so Alabama, in the early 19th century, Americans start to settle the Deep South because the region promises financial wealth and social status. They believed that the production of the soil would just lead to enormous profits, especially in the wake of new technologies that allow for the sorting and seeding of cotton. The region attracts a large proportion of young men. And so this is Bishop Nicholas Hamner Cobbs. He's a Virginian, but he's one of these people that makes the trip to Alabama. But he's not a fan of the people he sees around him. He says that the region's attracting all sorts of people who had, quote, had come out on the vague errand of seeking their fortune, or the more definite one of seeking somebody else's. All right, so in the early days, Alabama's full of rough, wild, unmannered young men. This really plays out in one place in particular, Madison County, Huntsville, Alabama, because it's more mountainous than the rest of the state, right? Or North Alabama in general, it's more mountainous, including, right, Madison County, and it's not called Madison County yet, but it is called Huntsville. Among these settlers, John Hunt builds the first cabin on the banks of the Big Spring, and although there's these squatters, new government policies about selling the land push a lot of these people off. So the first settlers of Alabama consist of people with rough spirits. Cobbs again calls them, the proportion of young men, as in all new countries, was great. The proportion of wild young men was unfortunately greater. He observes this as a violent disruption in family and domesticity. And he says, in Alabama, according to Cobb, vulgarity, ignorance, fussy and arrogant pretension, unmitigated rowdyism, and bullying insolence characterize society. But it's these wild young men that embrace barbecue and give it its new political orientation. Because barbecue is just like them, humble, rustic, a little savage in its origins. So in this new place, so in early Alabama, 1819, the state has what at the time was the most kind of open and liberal constitution almost anywhere in the world. It provided for universal white male suffrage, and it also provided for frequent elections. So in other words, politicians had to campaign all the time, nonstop. And that means that the people could easily turn over their politicians if they wanted to. There's a broad electorate and they're voting often. So it's in Alabama that the politicians are really accountable to the people. All right, and that starts to change the relationship between them, and that starts to change the way that they host barbecues. All right, and in a way, this plays out especially in North Alabama. So in the early years, there are two political parties. The Royal Party. This party consists of a bunch of wealthy Georgians who moved to Alabama. When they got here, they thought that they would just, by virtue of their respectability and refinement and education, just take their role at the top. But there's this large population of these squatters, and they form what they call the Castor Royal Party. And they're rougher spirits, right? And they want politicians who look and act like them. They don't want someone better than them, right? That starts to look like elitist, bookish, nerdy, out of touch, right? Instead, they want someone who's ready to revel with them. And that makes barbecue a really attractive option for political campaigns. Instead of deferring to their social and financial elite, the homesteaders are nominating their own candidates and doing their own type of politics. So like I said, when Jefferson and Washington were doing these things, they were providing a treat, showing their generosity. In the new barbecue politics, it's the people who host the barbecue, and they are inviting the candidates to come to them. And it's expected. It's expected that candidates go to the barbecues and sit with the people, eat among them, drink among them. And it's this sort of ambition, but also this sort of humility that upsets people who belong to this so-called royal party. So in this picture here, this is Andrew Jackson being roasted, barbecued over the flames of public opinion. So this is a new way of thinking about politics too. In 1824 and then 1828, Jackson's doing something that the previous generations would not have done, and that's make his ambitions known, okay, and have an army of like grassroots organizers going around and putting these barbecues on and portraying Jackson as a man of the people, a common man, even though he is a lawyer and elite slaveholder in Nashville. He does have these humble origins. He's born before the Revolution. They don't even really know where. It could be North Carolina or South Carolina. So yeah, he's using barbecue to attract, political support and to link himself to the common man. But that could also be used against him, right? Public opinion could turn and start to roast Jackson instead. So what does this all mean for Alabama? Well, in North Alabama, these wealthier sorts who had expected that they would just walk into power and status, they get frustrated by the ways that the other party uses barbecue as a campaign tactic. And they think it's really taboo that a politician would do something would lower themselves to sit and eat and drink among the people. Certainly they should be better than that, right? Well, they're still in a frame of mind that thinks that, yeah, politicians should be above the people. But the new style of politics emphasizes that politicians should be of the people. So, in that spirit, North Alabama sees an anti-barbecue campaign. They want to get rid of barbecue as a campaign tactic. In the letters to the editor and in the columns of the Huntsville newspaper, the Southern Advocate, there's this guy who pen names himself Barbecuensis. And he writes things like this, right? We had seen at the barbecues some happy sovereign who had been reveling in all the ecstasies of gratuitous whiskey and enjoying freedom which knew no restraint, and had fallen asleep in paradise of perfect unconsciousness. Right, so in his view, right, politicians should not be reveling, drinking with the people. And I know it's hard to believe that people used to think that we could have too much freedom, but that's exactly what he did think, right? They're acting too unrestrained in their behavior. They're not showing manners and respectability. And yeah, he thinks that this new style of politics that emphasizes the common man and being of and among the people means that the type of candidate there's a lower standard for the type of candidate. A vast majority of barbecue candidates have as much brains in their stomachs as in their skulls, so that in judging of their merits, there can be nothing lost in making a direct and exclusive appeal to the abdomen. Right, so in his view, these candidates do not charm you with their intellect and how well read they are. They charm you by showing you how much pork and whiskey they can consume. It doesn't really work out for most of the anti-barbecue candidates. In fact, in one election, there's Joseph Leftwich. He's running for tax collector in Madison County on a very strict anti-barbecue platform, and finishes dead last. Alabamians would rather get rid of their politicians than their barbecues. So in the time I have left, I want to just hit some highlights of the rest. A couple of my favorite stories tell you about some of the places that tend to get noticed around the state and then around the nation. But I want to put those in a chronology that shows you how it's still continuing to change, right? It's changed from something that the politicians do to treat voters, and now it's turned into something that the voters do to welcome candidates and judge them and be with them. But now we're going to get into the era of the restaurant, which is a relatively new development in this, 500-year history of barbecue and 200-ish year history of barbecue in the state. Yeah, so in 1891, the first barbecue joint in the country that we're aware of so far opened in Irondale, Golden Rule Barbecue. 1891, oldest barbecue joint that we can put a name on and find in the records anywhere in the country. But these barbecue joints, they have their own development. They have their own kind of change over time. Yeah, so in these early years, 1891, Birmingham, right, major steel town, like the Magic City, it seems to have grown up overnight, and now it's making all this steel. But this is a new era for workers, right? Urbanization and industrialization mean eating outside the home more often than would have ever been done. For the long history of what we know as the restaurant, restaurants would have been for travelers and then wealthy people. So like a restaurant in town would have been, for like the wealthiest people. But other than that, a restaurant meant a tavern that you slept into and you got a meal while you were on the road. And in a way, this is a new development for restaurants, and barbecue seems to fit. So in the steel towns, okay, for example, barbecue develops as a way to feed people during the lunch hours and after shifts, which means they stay open really late. They usually serve a lot of beer, and the food is cheap and filling. Not only barbecue, but lots of things like hamburgers and sausages too. But these restaurants, they have moved and adapted over the years. And Golden Rule is just a really good example of that, because there's two developments in particular that changed the barbecue restaurant from kind of a rough steelworker drinking establishment late into the night to like a family-friendly diner sort of atmosphere. One development is the car, so people can travel further and faster than ever before, and then the interstate highway system, the Eisenhower interstate system in the 50s, changes the location of these places. Golden Rule, for example, moves and locates itself at major junctions and major routes, for example, between Birmingham and Atlanta. As such, they're also able to take advantage of some local politics. Golden Rule was usually the last or the first stop, depending on which way you're going, in a sea of dry counties between Birmingham and the Georgia line. And it's the same is true for a place called Greentop in Dora, the first or the last stop, depending on your direction, in a sea of dry counties between Birmingham and Memphis. But with the post-war baby boom, more families eating out, more families in general. Yeah, these restaurants continue to adapt, expanding their menus, starting to offer lighter fare, maybe like the barbecue baked potato, or it's hard to think of a barbecue baked potato as light fare. Maybe like the barbecue salad. Yeah, so Big Bob Gibson's has like a barbecue salad, right, with like smoked chicken topping it. Yeah, so they start to change their menus, and they have to also diversify their menus for different tastes, but also for people who are traveling now farther than ever. So they have to now add the brisket because there might be someone from Texas in town. They might have to start adding a different sauce because that's what people expect. I think we like to, I know we like to romanticize the middle of nowhere barbecue joint, but the truth about it is that these barbecue joints did not used to be in the middle of nowhere. The interstate system has usually gone around them, and they've stayed where they were. That's the story of Big Bob Gibson's. This story, which is now 101 years old, is another really good example of change over time. In the 1920s, Gibson started just selling barbecue out of the back of his house on a dirt road, and he would basically like cook on Thursday, and then he would just sell it until it was gone, and then he would go back to work. And he worked on the railroad, and he just repeat that every week. But by the 1950s, right, again, amid this like post-war baby boom, he wants a brick and mortar establishment, right? Now you can picture the booths so a family can sit there together. And they open the location on Danville Road in Decatur. But yeah, these are two places that look, at least to us today, to be in the middle of nowhere. This is Top Hat Barbecue, which used to be on the major road between Birmingham and Huntsville, Decatur. But since then, interstate has taken most of the traffic, 5 to 10 miles away. And then, yeah, I mentioned Green Top. It used to be on the major road between Birmingham and Memphis, but now it's a little out of the way because of the new interstate. So yeah, these places that seem to be in the middle of nowhere were not at one time in the middle of nowhere. Barbecue also gets caught up in the civil rights movement in two different but not exclusive ways. Through a rising generation of Black entrepreneurs who want to put their destiny in their own hands and get out from under like Jim Crow white oversight at their current jobs, some of which are pretty well-paying jobs. And that's the story of both Dreamland and Archibald's. In 1958, John Big Daddy Bishop opens Dreamland, and it's part of what all these places do, right? He leaves his job as like a cement mixer, bricklayer, and opens this cafe. According to the legend, he saw the cafe in his dreams, hence the name, Dreamland. And that in the early years, it had a diverse menu, but people tended to flock to his barbecue, and so he scaled down the menu. And as most of you know, if you've been to the Skyland Avenue location, the original one, that's all it does, right? Ribs and white bread and sauce, maybe a bag of Golden Flake, right? This is Archibald's, right, in Northport/Tuscaloosa. George and Betty Archibald, they left, good paying factory jobs at a paper mill and opened Archibald's in Northport on what is now Martin Luther King. They did this in 1962. And then since, both of these places have continued to spread. Dreamland has locations in other states now. Archibald's has 3 locations in Tuscaloosa-ish, that kind of area, but then they're also set to open one in Birmingham proper. And Archibald's won Good Morning America's best ribs second place in best ribs in the country contest, reaching the final 4. But these 2 places, they have a different sort of relationship when thinking about Black civil rights movement, directly involved in activism. This is Laney's Barbecue Spot in Selma. It opened in 1942, amid World War II. Again, this is a couple that left factory jobs. I think he left a baseball bat factory job to open this joint, right, and kind of put his destiny in his own hands, named after his wife, Laney. But yeah, by the 1960s, they recall feeding the civil rights workers who were gathering in Selma to start their march to Montgomery in 1963. And then this is Brenda's Barbecue in Montgomery, literally on the path at the end of that march, right? So we've got the start of the march and the end of the march here. The march ended just a few blocks from this location, if my mapping is correct. But yeah, they both recall being very active with like the NAACP, and their timing is really interesting, right? They are both opening in the 1940s, and this is a really big moment for Black civil rights. World War II has unleashed something called the Double V campaign, victory over fascism abroad and segregation at home. And so things like the NAACP are seeing skyrocketing enrollments and membership. And so they all recall things like hosting meetings because it was a relatively safe space, right? Black-owned, mostly Black clientele, mostly out of eyesight and earshot of people looking to stop them. And so I'll wrap up here, yeah, perfect, because barbecue has continued to change. And in some ways, it's kind of a story of old is new again, because we've got places like Jim and Nick's trying to revive some old-time methods and old-time products. They use something called heritage breed hogs. These are older breeds of hogs that the commodity market has tended to overlook, or not overlooked, they've actually bred out of them some characteristics so that they grow faster and grow leaner. And that's what was useful for the pork marketplace toward the end of the 20th century. Fast-growing, very lean. Think about the Other White Meat campaign, an emphasis on really lean pork. But yeah, these heritage breeds, they're older and they store fat differently and they grow slower. And so according to chefs in the pork industry, they have more complex flavors. They do have more fat and especially more intramuscular fat. And that means that they're juicier and tastier. But yeah, they grow slower. And that's why most people stay away from them. So in a way, Jim and Nick's is doing something new, trying to do this heritage breed hog thing. They have this organization called the Fatback Collective about raising these pigs. But it's an old variety of pig, right? They're reviving this old breed. There are other new realms for barbecue. And when it comes to taking the name Alabama barbecue beyond the state, I don't think you can do a better job than Big Bob Gibson's, winning Memphis in May, winning Grand Championship 5 times, I believe, but winning a category, which is a record, but winning first place 12 times in pork shoulder and once in smoked wings at the contest, plus then all the other contests that they go to. So taking Alabama barbecue and something like Alabama white sauce beyond the borders of the state, right? Getting seen on TV around the world. Jim and Nick's does that too. What I think is really cool about that is on their menu, it says Morgan County white sauce, right? Emphasizing that place, Decatur. But then I'll wrap up with this one, because this one's a little trickier. Moe's Original Barbecue gets its start in Vail, Colorado, but Moe was from Tuscaloosa. All right, so back when I was getting started with this, I taught a class at UA called The History of Barbecue. And people would tell me that back in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Moe was basically kind of an early version of a food truck. And he would show up outside the fraternities on Friday night and cook barbecue at the parties. He also would take his little truck, his setup, and go to Indian Hills Country Club, which is where Paul Bear Bryant golfed, but also this guy, Dr. Fernandez. Dr. Fernandez was the team neurosurgeon or neuroscientist or whatever, whatever that meant in the 1960s. I don't think football players wondered about their brains back then. But he took care of the football team and he golfed with Bear Bryant. And it's his son, Mike Fernandez, pictured here. In the 1990s, he got with Moe and they opened a brick and mortar restaurant, barbecue joint, at the L&N station in downtown Tuscaloosa. Moe passed away in the 1990s, and then Fernandez went to culinary school, did his turn doing like the cruise ships and resort kind of thing, you know, that kind of, you gotta feed 1,000 people in an hour sort of work that you do when you just get out of those places. And that's how he ends up in Vail, right, cooking at these sort of resort-style places. But he talks about what he missed was Alabama barbecue. In Colorado, Texas and brisket seemed to dominate everything, just like it does in most of the West. But he wanted to bring like smoked wings and pork shoulder and ribs and do it the way that Moe did it, but add to his, adding his own new skills learned in culinary school to the practice and the art of barbecuing. And so it starts in Vail, and then its next restaurants open in Alabama. They open in the Gulf Shores, they open in Montgomery and Birmingham, and now they're everywhere. When I first moved to Tennessee, there was a Moe's up there, so I got to get a little taste of home, even though I was away. So that is a brief overview of Alabama barbecue, and it's just going to continue to change over time. And that's where my new book, American Bacon, comes in, which is out actually this week with the University of Georgia Press. I was interviewing Van Sykes, the new generation of owner at Bob Sykes Barbecue in Bessemer. In Alabama, as you know, we do spare ribs, right? Get those baby back ribs out of here. But he was like, I think I might have to change, even though this is what my father and my mother did, and that's what we've been doing, I guess. I mean, I talked to him a while ago, so it's probably 60 years now, right? Bob Sykes and all these other places have been doing spare ribs. But he said that the American obsession with bacon was changing the size and shape of spare ribs because their butchers are taking more and more of the belly higher and higher up the sides because they can sell pork bellies at a higher price than they can sell spare ribs. And so the spare ribs are shrinking and getting smaller and changing the shape. And that's a relatively recent development, that pork bellies would be an expensive product. In the 1980s and 1990s, pork bellies were so cheap, the United States government bought them from the pork industry to then give away abroad as foreign food aid. Like by the mid-20-teens, when I did this interview though, pork bellies were so expensive that butchers were changing the size and the shape of the animal and the way they butchered it to suit our demand for bacon. So the future of Alabama barbecue will probably still portray itself as rooted in the past and rooted in tradition. But as our stories show, it will always change with the times. So I am happy to linger and answer your questions. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about how the Alabama white barbecue sauce.
Yeah, so Big Bob Gibson, according to legend, and no one really disputes it. People dispute which is the best one, but they don't dispute who invents it, as far as I've seen. In the 1920s, Gibson invented this white sauce, mayonnaise, vinegar, black pepper, some lemon juice, Worcestershire sauce, some cayenne, I believe, or I think a lot of them these days have cayenne in them. And it really is, it's a good fit for chicken, because it's a way to add fat, mayonnaise, right, to what is otherwise a pretty lean animal, right? So, it just, at Big Bob Gibson's, they say that they baptize their chickens, dunking them in white sauce.
Have you seen Big Bob Gibson's office there and location at the Gator?
Yeah, so when I was researching the book, I got to meet and talk to most of these people. So I got to meet his grandson, Don McLemore, and then the new kind of owner, right, Chris Lilly, at that 6th Avenue location in Decatur. And that's actually where I had, all those years, that's where I had the book release party. When the book came out. So that was super cool to see like my name and the book title on that like super famous sign with that pig on it. So yeah, they've been good friends. My wife is from North Alabama, so Big Bob Gibson's and white sauce are sacred to her and her family.
What's your favorite one?
Whatever one I'm eating. And what I would say is that since I moved to Tennessee, I've learned to cook it myself, because I never was motivated to cook it here, because I lived in Tuscaloosa. If I opened my windows on a beautiful day like this, I could literally smell like 3 places. I lived closest to Archibald's. When I was in grad school, I lived very close to Archibald's. So yeah, on one of those like October days with a football game on and my windows open, that's what I could like. And so that place is really special, because we would like all bring a side, and then I would run down there and like get ribs and bring it back, and we'd watch the game. Gibson's is really important to me because of my wife and having the party there, and Saws in Birmingham was like a ritual for us. Like on the first nice day of spring, all of us grad students, we'd get in a car and head up there and go to Avondale Brewery and take like 50 smoked wings to the pub and like just get sunburned. So yeah, those are places that mean a lot to me. Mm-hmm.
What was kind of your like point of entry into this being a topic that you wanted to explore? Like, it's one thing to just like enjoy barbecue, to turn it into what you've turned it into. Like, what was the reason for that? Just the interest level, where did that all come from?
Yeah, I mean, I got started in it because I was getting paid to get started in it, right? The State Department of Tourism needed this story. They needed marketing materials. They needed to know what they were trying to sell to people around the country and the world. Why do you come to Alabama to eat barbecue? But yeah, I'm trained as a historian first, so just all these stories about the ways that there's it reflects, and food reflects, stories about like change over time and complexity, and how different perspectives and multiple perspectives can see the same thing, right? Like for some people, right, that barbecue politics of the 1820s was literally the end of the world. But for others, it was like the dawn of a new like revolutionary era, focusing on individualism and liberty and the so-called age of the common man, as they put it. And that's the story in bacon too. It's a story about a food that was at best mundane for millennia, right? A way to add fat and a little bit of flavor to an otherwise humble, meager meal of greens or porridges or stews. Mundane things, everyday things, can't be pop culture gastronomic phenomena. And in the 20th century, bacon had to like die as a staple because of our health warnings about nitrites and nitrates and salt and saturated fat. In fact, in 1977, bacon's actually the subject of a USDA committee threatening to ban it. But once it disappears as something that you eat every day in small amounts, adding it to your meager meal, it can then be reborn as this decadent pleasure. And now you have, right, the bacon old-fashioned and the bacon martini and the bacon donut, or Paula Deen's ladies brunch burger, right, the bacon cheeseburger on 2 Krispy Kreme buns. And so, like, yeah, so that's what I'm interested in, first and foremost, as the historian, is how these things change over time.
What are your favorite sides?
So I'm from Wisconsin originally, so I'm a mac and cheese person. I love greens since I've started coming down here. Like the jalapeno cornbread at Moe's was always a must. Those are the things off the top of my head. I make, like, because I'm from Milwaukee and relatively new immigrants, my grandparents were, so like I make like German potato salad when I make it at home, again with bacon in it, the hot kind, bacon, onions, and but yeah, when I'm out, I'm probably gonna get, because believe it or not, based on what I studied, the nurses tell me my cholesterol is high. So I usually try to get the greens cooked in bacon. And, you know, got to get your magnesium.
When I was a boy, I lived in Statham, Georgia.
Okay.
It's about 15 miles from Athens.
Right, okay.
And the black guys would have a baseball game on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
They'd cook barbecue in a dugout pit.
Mm-hmm.
Took it all night long. They would serve sandwiches. It would be 3 pieces of bread and 2 layers of barbecue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
And it cost $1.
All right.
If you ever see barbecue where it was 3 pieces of bread.
I have not seen that. No, I'm more familiar with like the Archibalds and Dreamland practice of giving you like a half loaf of bread to sop up sauce and grease. And I guess I could make a sandwich out of it. But no, I haven't seen that exactly. But that's a really good, so, I mean, I talked about this Alabama politics, you know, and using it as a campaign tactic. So for most of barbecue's history, it's not in the restaurant. Okay, that's relatively new, since the 1890s, but more honestly since the 1920s, and even more accurate, what we know as the barbecue joint is a 1940s, 50s sort of thing. So in an age before refrigeration, though, barbecue is not something you can do for your family, right? Because if you're going to slaughter an animal and barbecue, you better have 100 people to feed. So that's what made it useful for the campaigns. It could You spread the smell throughout the valley. Everyone knows what's going on. In fact, Bishop Cobbs, who I introduced you to, he talks about early Alabamians being absolutely obsessed with political speeches, but usually the barbecue was the sign for everyone to gather for the speech. So I missed that part earlier. But a baseball game would be another really good one, right? 18 players-ish, their families, their friends coming out to watch, get it going, play a game, and have a meal. In the early days, muster day or militia day was also a huge barbecue event. So once or twice a year, all the eligible young men of the colony, but then the state, would have to gather and do a day of drilling and learning how to fire the musket and the cannon and whatnot. But usually there was a barbecue as what one person said, the incentive for everyone to show up as their duty required. And then, it was supposed to also be, you drill and you practice during the day, but it was supposed to be festive and fun with barbecue and whiskey later that night. So these really big events for a long time are when you saw barbecue.
When was the last time you saw a barbecued goat?
So my family actually lives in southern Indiana, so we see it in southern Indiana and Kentucky all the time. It's always a staple. Not usually as like a little pile of meat, but like stirred into stews, right? Brunswick stew, for example. Or, what's the one they have in Kentucky? Burgoo, that's it. Burgoo. So a vegetable stew with, stewed and barbecued goat in it.
I used to eat barbecued goat a lot when I lived in Georgia. My daddy used to get a goat, and he had a guy who would slaughter it. And I guess he'd give him half of it, and we'd eat half of it. I hadn't seen barbecued goat many years. I think people's taste get more refined. You can't hardly find real sour syrup in a grocery store anymore.
So also narrowing things down. So in these early barbecues I talked about, like at muster day or probably the baseball game, or especially at these political barbecues, barbecue did not have any sort of regional differentiations. That is a product of the restaurant industry, because restaurants have the profit loss motivation. So they have to pick, especially in the age before refrigeration, they have to pick like one or two things and stick with it. But then people take those recipes and create their own places, and now all of a sudden you have a region. You have Kansas City barbecue, or St. Louis, or Memphis. So the styles that everyone fights over, those are relatively new phenomenon. When people describe like early 18th century or 19th century barbecues, there's almost no regional style so far as we can tell. When they talk about these Alabama political barbecues, they talk about, pork for sure, but also beef, but goat and lamb. Because at this time, it's something that, whatever you could spare and contribute turned into the barbecue. It's not until you get the restaurant where you have to be very selective, and you can't, now with refrigeration, you can have a menu the size of the Bible, right? But back in those days, you couldn't. You had to sell just the smallest possible menu, because you'd be risking spoilage otherwise.
So what brought you to the South?
Grad school. But I moved everywhere during my life. So I'd lived in Virginia, I'd lived in Texas, I'd actually lived in Tennessee before. And then, grad school took me to Alabama. So,
What's been the most surprising thing to learn about through the history of the development of barbecue that changed the way you might think about it?
I mean, I think the idea that like these styles are newer than we maybe think, or that we argue that they are, was really interesting to me. So in school, we think of something called invented traditions, and they're traditions that we give like ancient value to so that they have legitimacy to us now. Things like the Christmas tree, for example. It's sort of still relative, like Queen Victoria, right, in her German heritage brought it, and now everyone has one. But they link it to like age-old things. And so, yeah, we have these invented traditions of these regional styles, and we root them really deep in the past, but they're, yeah, fundamentally kind of a late 19th, early 20th century phenomenon to have, you know, the whole hog. But some of this stuff is really old, like the vinegar sauces of North Carolina have their origins in English settlement, or the mustard sauces. So yeah, kind of the play of the old and the new. I'm happy to linger, but maybe we, yeah, like officially call it, but I'll be around, so please, I'd love to see you. The barbecue book is $20. American bacon is $35. I do both for $50. You all are the second people ever to have a public event with American bacon on sale, because it was finally released last week on Monday. But yeah, I'll love to linger and chat. Thank you.